Artificial sweeteners, are they healthy or are they not? Seems like it should be a simple question to answer, but it's not always so easy, is it? I'm Dr. Brett Scher, the medical director at dietdoctor.com, and I want to talk about a study that talks about the glucose variability with certain non-nutritive sweeteners or artificial sweeteners, but then more importantly, tie that into the bigger question of should we be eating non-nutritive sweeteners, artificial sweeteners? Are they a net benefit in our diet? Could they serve a role, or are they harmful for everybody? And what questions you should probably be asking to know if it's right for you. So first, let's get into the basics of this study that was published in Cell called Personalized Microbiome-Driven Effects of Non-Nutritive Sweeteners on Human Glucose Tolerance. Now, there's a lot in this study, and I don't think it's all necessarily pertinent for sort of the average everyday person to know if they should be eating or drinking non-nutritive sweeteners, or eating too, I guess. Either way, you can get them either way. But here's the key. You're going to see a lot of talk about this study on social media, but the first most important part was it was in healthy, non-overweight, normal glycemic people, right? Completely healthy people. Nobody with prediabetes, nobody with type 2 diabetes, nobody who has overweight or obesity. So right away, we have to question how translatable the findings of this study are to the other populations, which is unfortunately the majority of the population in the United States and industrialized world. So they had, at the end, 123 of these young, healthy people separated into different groups, and about 20 in each group. And there was a control group, a group who drank liquids with glucose, one with saccharin, one with sucralose, one with stevia, and one with aspartame. And look, there's been some controversy about some of these chemical sweeteners in terms of their cancer risk. We'll save that for another one. It's really been found, I guess I'm not going to save it, I'm going to talk about it anyway. It's really been found in real high doses in rodents, no real data in humans to show it's a risk. But if it's something that's a concern, then you can certainly pick some that aren't that are more natural, basically, things like stevia or some of the sugar alcohols. Now, interesting, the sugar alcohols were not included in here, and those are some of the more popular ones now, I'd say, like the erythritol, and some like monk fruit were not included, or allulose weren't included, but that's okay, you can't include them all. But in this study, basically what they found was that the non-nutritive sweeteners could affect the microbiome in some people, right? It wasn't across the board, and it could affect glucose variability after a glucose tolerance test in some people. And sucralose and saccharin had the biggest effect on the glucose response in the oral glucose tolerance test. Now, the fact that I keep saying in some people is what made this sort of conclusion a personalized approach or a personalized response. Anything that can happen in some people and not in others. And it seemed to be tied to the microbiome. Now, I don't know, the microbiome is always a little bit challenging because there's so much in there, and how do we know what the differences really mean? But one interesting part was they did microbiome fecal transplants into rats, and whatever the human was showing with their glucose tolerance test, that translated to the rat as well. So that was really interesting. Now, there's some pushback about this paper that they didn't really have clearly defined primary outcomes, which seems to be true, which kind of weakens the findings. There's also pushback about, does this really clinically meaningful? If there's a mild variation in the glucose tolerance, does that really matter? Does that apply clinically? The other thing is, though, the timed response. It was a 14-day experiment, and it looked like there was a change over time as people were drinking the non-nutritive sweeteners more, which then reverted back to baseline once they stopped. So the question then becomes, if it's years and years and years of this non-nutritive sweetener, what would happen? Now, that's the short, sort of clean version of the study without getting into too many details, because the more important part is, what does this mean for you, right? If you're someone who uses some of these non-nutritive sweeteners, what does it mean? Should you stop? Should you change? And at Diet Doctor, our approach is, look, if you can get by without it, that's the best. Because regardless of what effect it has on your glucose and insulin, which is important, and I'll talk about that, but regardless of that, for some people, it can keep that desire for a sweet taste around. If you are one of those people, then you are clearly better off not using any of these non-nutritive sweeteners. Also, if you combine it with caloric food, like you put it in a dessert, you put it in a treat, you put it in a baked goods, it can make you want more and more, sort of that hedonic characteristic of it. Now, if you're using it in a liquid, a non-calorie liquid, and you're using it to sort of satisfy that sweet tooth, and it doesn't make you want more and more and crave more and more, then it definitely can play a positive role. These non-nutritive sweeteners can be very beneficial in that role to kind of tickle your sweet tooth a little bit, get rid of it without making you crave even more. So if you fall into that camp, then it makes sense that they play a role. But which ones are best? And that can be a little confusing too. It depends what you define by best. So we have a whole guide at dietdoctor.com on low carb sweeteners and keto sweeteners, and what we say are some of the best ones, quote unquote best ones. And what we mean by that are been shown to affect glucose and insulin the least. And those tend to be stevia, erythritol, monk fruit, and xylitol. Now, based on this study, ones like sucralose and saccharin are probably ones that you might want to sub out for some of these other ones. In our guide, we also talk about why you probably want to avoid sweeteners like maltitol, because that has been shown to be absorbed in the small intestine and can raise blood sugar and insulin, and how packets of Equal, Sweet and Low, Splenda, even though they're labeled as 0 calories, can have calories and can have carbs in them. So if you use a lot of them over time, it can add up. So we warn you about that in our guide as well. But basically, I think the most important thing to ask yourself is, what role is this non-nutritive sweetener playing? Is it necessary? And if it is playing an important role and you feel that it's necessary, then it's fine to use. But again, probably best to fall back on some of the tried and true and sort of most consistently shown to not raise glucose or insulin, like stevia, erythritol, monk fruit, and xylitol. And chances are, if you're using these to replace sugar, it's a net benefit. But if you can go without it, of course, it's probably better to go without it. So that's sort of my basic way of trying to take this study and say, look, what does this mean for you? What can you learn from it? And what about the bigger topic of non-nutritive sweeteners? So if you want to learn more about the studies and the details, please go to dietdoctor.com and look for our keto sweetener guide, our low carb sweetener guide. We'll include the links down below to help you understand for you if non-nutritive sweeteners are the right choice or not. All right, hope this was helpful. We'll see you next time here on Diet Doctor News on YouTube.